Welcome to the October 20th edition of the Study Hall. Today's topic is miscellaneous sentence corrections involving comparisons by popular request. So we are going to first look at the usual intro with warnings and guidelines and so on. Let's try to do that quickly so that we can get into the problems here. The usual, you guys have seen this. Please don't submit problems that are too general. People are still doing this. Try not to submit problems that amount to the entire scope of the test, please. Or, some giant whole section of it like geometry. It's not something we can do in an hour and a half. At the same time, please try not to submit things that are too specific. This is still the primary culprit. People are submitting things that are too specific for a study hall. In general, if you are giving us one problem, that's not really an appropriate study hall topic. Because we have forums, the purpose of the forums is precisely for people to address single questions. Because when you put that topic on a forum, it becomes a thread that can then be searched and found on the internet. As opposed to these videos, the videos are helpful, but at the same time, you can't search the problems that are in the videos. So it's a very different kind of thing. So if you have single questions, please put them on the forums. So a lot of submissions in the last couple of weeks were of the forum, like, here's a question, please tell me why answer B is not better than answer D. Not the kind of thing that we want here in the study hall. Also, remember the study hall product is something that is viewed by hundreds, if not thousands of people. So please don't submit personal issues and things like that. Not the place for that. We don't really want to present advice to a single individual in front of an audience of hundreds or thousands. That's not really appropriate. As far as addressing these things, we do have a folder on the forum dedicated to that purpose. It's called the General Questions folder. And if people really want lots of detailed individual attention, that's where our private tutoring comes into play. But the General Questions folder is designed to answer most of the basic questions about things like study plans. So what we should see, topics of intermediate depth. This is a good example of a topic of intermediate depth. It's not all of sentence correction, but it's also not a single problem. It's a class of problems that is a reasonable size for a study hall. So that's a good suggestion. If you give us specific problems, then great. They should tie into things that are more general. Not so general that we can't answer it, but a more general theme. And finally, no OG problems. You got to tell us where the problems are from, please. You can't just give us a problem. A couple more examples. Don't submit official guide problems, please. If you do this, we just have to ignore it because we are not allowed to use the official guide. No single questions. This is from a couple of weeks ago. This is a single question. This is the kind of thing you should post on the forum and not here. And in fact, before you post it on the forum, you should search the forum to see if the question has already been addressed. Because our forums have been around for a long time. So the chance that your question has already been addressed on the forum is actually pretty good. Finally, we talked about this last time. Please try not to be demanding and rude and etc. As we said last time, there might be a language barrier here with some individuals, but that's still an issue because remember, this is, broadly speaking, preparation for the business community. And the business community is very sensitive to things like rudeness or demands, especially in the situation where we have a non-paying client and so on. And that's the kind of thing that even if it's unintentional is still a big deal. So if there is anybody in the audience who doesn't really understand why this is not okay, then that's something you should look into, especially if you want to conduct business in the American business community. So, but please try to follow normal rules of etiquette. Here's a couple more examples from the last couple of weeks. 3 more examples of what not to submit. One person submitted this one here, which has 2 really big problems. The first problem is that this is as individual results. Again, the study hall is not the place for individual results. Also, if you dig a little deeper, you'll see this person is not really asking a question that we can answer. Like, this person is basically just saying, I took the test and I found the problems hard, so what should I do? I mean, that's not really a specific question with a specific answer. I mean, this could mean absolutely any type of question at all. So if the person who posted this is out there somewhere, you got to be more specific than this. This is not something that we could, even if we wanted to, we could not answer this question. So it's kind of like saying, I'm unhappy, what should I do, to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist would have to answer a lot more specific questions first. Second submission, this is another example of what we were talking about earlier. This is a single question that someone posted in the last couple of weeks from the Foundation book. That's not what belongs here in the study hall. This should go on the forum. So if you are the person who posted this if you're the person who submitted this, please post it in the forum in the appropriate folder. And finally, this one. Last 2 weeks I had a question, but it wasn't answered. Do you know when you'll answer it? The first thing that was interesting about this is I looked through the submissions to see if this person had actually submitted a question, and I didn't see one. So maybe there was a problem in the first place. But regardless of that, what you've got to know is that we get way, way, way more submissions than we could ever possibly answer, because this is a free product that has become rather popular. And so, as you might expect, we get a lot of submissions. I think in the last 2 weeks alone, we got something like 50. So that means the majority of those we can't use because there are just too many. It's kind of like when you write a letter to a popular advice columnist. The odds are that even if your letter is a very good question, they simply won't have the bandwidth to answer it, and they have to pick and choose sort of at random. So same kind of thing here. We get a lot more submissions than we could conceivably use, and so a certain amount of my selection procedure is sort of random. Like I do try to make sure that we do approximately equal amounts of verbal and quad. But other than that, there's not a lot of logic to what gets chosen when, other than it needs to be a good theme. So if we don't address the question that you submit, then I apologize for that in advance, but there's also the option of the forums. I think that's it. That's the warnings. The one other thing that we need to tell you is that we have extensive archives. There are currently something like 50 sessions in the archive, somewhere between 45 and 50. There's a lot of them. So what this means is that your submission may well be already covered. For instance, a couple of people in the last 2 weeks were asking questions such as, what is the basic approach for long reading passages? That is something that already has a study hall. There's already a study hall on basic intro to long reading passages, so please go check it out. Same thing if you're asking about coordinate geometry data sufficiency. There's 2 study halls on that topic already. So if something is already covered, which a lot of things will be, then what you need to tell us is, are there any aspects that have not been covered yet? So if you say, I want to talk about long reading passages, that's great. The inherent response there is, please go check out the existing lecture on that. So if there's something that's not in that one that you want to ask about, you've got to specify. So, of course, if your topic is totally new, then you don't. But otherwise, please specify. Any questions? Okay, this is it. Smiley face if you guys understand these little guidelines and rules. I know that part is boring, but it's kind of like when you take an airline flight. Every time you take a flight, they have to give you the safety lecture. just in case you're a first-time flyer. Same kind of thing here. We have to give you this. Okay, let's jump into it. Remember, today's theme is comparison problems in sentence correction. And by the way, the other thing you should know, answer buttons, you should see them, not quite yet, you should see them right now. There should be answer buttons that look approximately like that on the left. Those are what you should use to indicate your answers. Please do not type your answers to problems into the text box, because if you do, that's not really fair to the other people attending the session, nor is it fair to people watching recordings. So please use the answer buttons to answer the question. Also, if any of you are new to this, please do not click twice. If you click your answer twice, the second click will erase the first click. So one click. If you need to change the letter of your answer, you click once again on the new answer. One click. And people will not see who, I mean, you guys are all anonymous anyway, so whatever. But people will not see who gave what answer. We'll just see the statistics of the whole class at the end of the problem. Smiley face icon, please, if you guys are ready to start with some comparisons. Okay, here is the first problem for today. Right there. Here's a timeline, or sorry, a timer. And I'll give you like a minute 50, minute 45. Have a good time. Remember, please use the answer buttons. Okay, if any of you are newcomers here, make sure you remember that the GMAT requires you to answer every question before you can move on. So if you have not answered, please answer. Okay. All right, here are the class statistics. I'm going to put them on the board. There are your class statistics. So we have a split. There's not really a lot of consensus here. It looks like we've got a lot of answers that are popular with about the same level of frequency. So anyway, remember that the theme of today is comparisons. So first, let's make sure we understand what a comparison is. Like, I know this is sort of basic, but let's make sure we'll come back to this problem in a second. Let's make sure we understand what is a comparison for the purposes of sentence correction and language in general. What is a comparison? Like, what does that actually mean? Text box, if you guys have any ideas. Parallelism, hold that thought. We'll come back to that. We're not at that point yet. That's the next step. Like, parallelism is what do you do once you have a comparison. But first of all, what is a comparison? Like, what is it? How do you know when you have one in the first place? In other words, is the question. People are typing, so. Okay, like or unlike stuff, that's one type. If you're still typing, go ahead and keep typing. So, there's several types. First kind of situation is where you have literal comparisons or contrasts. Like, for instance, X is like Y, or X is unlike Y. X does Y as Z does, etc. So these are actual literal comparisons, like things are like or not like each other, or they do things the same way or they don't. Like it's a literal comparison. So Satish is giving us another type, which is quantitative comparisons. There's a whole study hall on these things, by the way, but quantitative comparisons are any sort of thing that deal with numbers or qualities being compared. So like greater than, less than, etc. Like more some sort of quality than, or as some sort of quality as, or etc. Or like half as much as, or like 30% of, etc. And then finally, this is a little bit more abstract. Maybe you guys are thinking it and just not articulating it. But another class of things that counts as comparisons is just general situations that aren't literally comparisons, but that require comparable things anyway. Like that needs some explanation. Here's an example of this. Like if you have something like I mistook X for Y, or the company replaced X with Y. Like, let's examine this. I mistook X for Y is not actually a comparison, meaning I'm not really comparing X and Y in any sort of way. But here's an example to get you thinking about what I mean here. If you say I mistook that table for something, what has to go in that blank? Text box. Could be a chair. Could it be any object? A noun? Because like noun is way too general. The person who said chair or same class as the table, that's the idea. Like for the sentence to make any sense, this has to be like chair or stool or etc. Like in other words, something of the same general type as a table. Like furniture or things that are sitting there in rooms or things like that. It's not just a noun, and that's the main point of comparison problems, is that random nouns will probably not work. So it can't just be any noun. As an example, try putting a noun like communism in there and see how that works out. I mistook this table for communism. Grammatically, fine, nothing wrong with that, but that's nonsense sentence. It doesn't make any sense at all. So when you have comparisons, that's why this is a comparison. Like unless you are literally crazy, like some sort of weird mental thing where you actually think a table could be communism. Barring that sort of situation, you have to have things that are actually comparable in this kind of situation. Like same thing with this. If you replace X with Y, they have to be things that are like each other. So if X is the company's old work truck, then Y has to be another vehicle. Like the company replaced the work truck with a new van. That works. That makes sense. The company replaced its old work truck with a new building would make no sense. The company replaced its old work truck with communism doesn't make sense. So, and all of those sentences are grammatically fine. They just don't make sense. So these are what comparisons are. There's literal comparisons and contrasts. This is probably the easiest type for you to see. There's quantitative comparisons where you make things numbers or greater than or less than or whatever. And then there's more abstract situations that still require some kind of not literal comparison, but that require you to have things in the same kind of general class. So, smiley face if this makes sense. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them. Now let's go back to what Maria said before. So how do you handle these things? We've already sort of answered this. But how do you handle comparisons, or like what do we need in the case of a comparison? So let me quote Maria in the text box, who was very concise in what she said. Maria said, with gusto, she said, parallelism, exclamation point. This is a good summary. Like, this is what we need in the case of a comparison. We need to have parallelism. And let's talk about what type of parallelism we need. Text box, anybody, can anybody elaborate on this a little bit? Like, what kind of parallelism are we talking about? So there's one kind is grammatical. Like ideally the parallel elements, the comparable elements should play the same grammatical role. So, i.e., they should be written in grammatical forms that are as similar as possible. This is true. What's the other kind? Satish, that's the right idea, but that sounds like it's copied and pasted from a strategy guide. So let's see if someone can give that same kind of idea without giving the exact words that we give in our materials. And I mean, this is a generally good idea, guys. If you can't express something in your own words, that means you don't really understand it. So if you're giving us our words, that's a problem. That means there's not real understanding there. So can anybody say what the other half of this is without regurgitating what Manhattan GMAT says? Yeah, Farah, we'll get there. I mean, Satish says this. Satish says, I mean, this is not wrong. I'm worried that there's not necessarily a complete understanding because these are the exact words that are in our strategy guide. So this is what Satish said, and this is correct. Let's just try to get to the bottom of this. So grammatically parallel means what we have up here. They have to look the same from the standpoint of grammar type stuff. So that's this. The question is, what does this mean? Like when we say logically parallel, what the heck does that actually mean? Text box, if anybody can tell me. Have equal importance in the sentence. That's part of it, but that's not the main point. Pablo's saying the two things have to actually be comparable from like a real world common sense kind of point of view. So, right. Like what logical parallelism means is that the things have to be like each other. So Kurt says same degree of importance. That's part of it. They have to be presented with the same priority. But more importantly, they have to be the same type or class of thing in the same situation. So that's what that means. I mean, when someone says logically parallel, the problem is it doesn't really seem like you understand that. It sounds like you just copied those words out of our strategy guide. But if you can say they have to be the same type of thing, that's what it means. So whenever you have jargon words like logically parallel, make sure that you can get those out of those kinds of words and into your own like normal person words. So let me use Maria's examples because I like them. That she's doing my work for me here. That's good. I like that. I like when people do my work for me for free. Here's Maria's example. It's a good one. What Maria's example says is this. I was an SAT teacher. Should be is. It's a good job. A duck's feet, let me change that to R because feet is plural. But other than that, this is a good illustration. A duck's feet are bigger than a chicken's. Okay, not a duck's feet. We need to put R there again. Yeah, like in the first example that Maria gives here, the comparison makes sense because this is a duck's feet and this is also a chicken's feet. So that comparison makes sense. Feet and other feet. This sentence, unless you literally mean that the duck's feet are bigger than the whole chicken, this second sentence is wrong. So this sentence implies that the duck's feet are bigger than a whole chicken. So that's not, that's obviously false if you've ever seen a chicken and a duck before. So that means the sentence is incorrect. A sentence like that could be right if that was what you actually meant. Like if you said, if I had a newborn baby and I would say, my arm is bigger than my baby, that's probably true. Like my arm is actually bigger than the whole baby. But otherwise, if I actually meant to compare arms to arms, then that would be wrong. So that's the point. As another illustration we wrote here, if you wrote, I mistook that table for communism, that is illogical. It's not grammatically wrong, but it's just kind of stupid. You can't compare a table with communism. So that's the point. Smiley face if you understand what these things are. This is how most parallelism works. You need both of these things. But smiley face if you understand both of these. Okay. Let me just give a couple more illustrations because a couple people were asking questions in the text box. Let's see. Okay, two more examples, sets of examples. If you say, I like to swim, I like swimming more than to run. Two things to look at here. There's grammar and there's meaning or logic. The grammar here is the problem because swimming is not written like to run. This is, if you guys are typing things in the text box, please make sure your texts are going to the whole room and not to me personally. So, okay, the grammar here doesn't make sense. The meaning is fine. The sentence is still incorrect because it has bad grammatical parallelism. But the meaning here is fine. So with fixed grammar could be, for example, something like I like swimming more than running. That's one way you could fix it. It's not the only way, but it's a way. As an example of a sentence that's wrong the other way around, let's say you have something like Chopin's concertos are more emotional than Mozart, period. Two things going on here. There's grammar and there's meaning or logic. The grammar is fine because both of those are nouns. I mean, Chopin's concertos are a noun, and Mozart is another noun. So if you are a computer and you are strictly looking at grammar elements, then this is fine, because a noun is compared to another noun. But the meaning here doesn't make sense. You can't say that a piece of music is more emotional than a person. So this is bad because you can't compare a piece of music to a person. It's kind of like saying I mistook this table for communism. It doesn't make sense. So smiley face if you guys understand these examples. Okay. So the point we want to make here is this. Comparisons are special in the sense that most comparison errors are not grammar. So parallelism, regular parallelism, has a lot of grammatical inconsistencies. But when you deal with comparisons, the vast majority, like most errors, will be errors of meaning or logic. Fewer of them will be grammatical errors. So if you are just looking at grammar, then most comparison errors will go right over your head. And it's important that you know that. So comparisons, the vast majority of errors that you encounter will be stuff like this. This is not a grammatical error. If you are just analyzing grammar, you will not think that anything is wrong with this sentence. But if you think about the logic of the sentence, you will know that it does not make sense. So let's go back to the problem that the class did at the outset of this discussion. That's this problem. So unlike most severance packages, this is setting up a comparison. So that's a direct comparison. That's the kind of comparison that's probably easiest to notice. So unlike most severance packages means that we're setting up a comparison. So what is unlike most severance packages? Text box, please. What is the comparison actually with? Yeah, it's got to be, it only makes sense if it's another severance package. So only makes sense if the other thing is also some type of severance package. And I mean, you can figure this out even if you have no idea what a severance package is. It's not even essential to know these words. Like if you think a severance package is like a suit that you wear on Fridays, it doesn't, I mean, it's wrong. That's not what it is. But even if you think that, the sentence will still work. I mean, you know. You just have to figure out that you're comparing one of these things to another one of these things. So this is a modifier which blah, 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 blah. That means that this is the other part of the comparison. So that's a problem. That's still a problem. That's still a problem. That's not. And that's not. So the ones that are red here, the ones that are dark red, are things that don't make sense in a comparison. The ones that are blue do make sense. Unlike most severance packages, you have to have another severance package. So A and B compare a severance package to workers. That doesn't make sense. C compares a severance package to a company. That doesn't make sense either. So only D and E have a sensible comparison. Now, the thing I want you guys to notice is that every one of these comparisons grammatically is fine. They are all fine from a grammatical standpoint. Like, that's a noun, so's that, so's that, so's that, and so's that. They're all nouns. So if you're just thinking about grammar, you will not have clue number one here. On the other hand, you should never be thinking about just grammar, because after all, sentences don't mean anything until they mean something. So you have to be taking meaning into account here all the time. So the main point here today is for you to get down to D and E. I'll do a really super quick discussion of the difference between D and E. If you say the last day that they are scheduled to collect, that's a problem because the last day that they are scheduled to collect. That's problematic because it implies that people are collecting days. So the way to see that is to think about another construction that's written the same way. Like the last song that I am scheduled to sing. This means I am singing songs, and this is the last one of those. So by extension, the last day that they are scheduled to collect means that they are collecting a bunch of days, and this is the last one. That doesn't make sense. So their last scheduled day does make sense, and then in order to collect is the purpose of that. So E is incorrect because it doesn't mean the right thing. But the main point today is for you to understand the comparison and to be able to very quickly eliminate A, B, and C because they are nonsense. Any questions about this problem, please type the questions in the text box. Otherwise, we will move on. No, the question in the text box, the last song I'm scheduled to sing, this would be fine if that's what I mean. So I'm using this to illustrate what this means. Like, this brown thing is probably fine. This is the last song that I am scheduled to sing. After this, I will go off the stage. But in this context, in the green context, it would be ridiculous. Like, because I don't collect days. I can sing a bunch of songs. The workers are not collecting days. So in this context, this would make sense. In this context, it clearly doesn't. Other questions, text box. Okay. Also, make sure you guys are not overly fixated on answers. Okay, the point of this problem is not that the answer is D. If that's what you got out of this, then you got nothing out of this. The point is, here's how comparisons work, and now because I know this, I can eliminate things. So do not be overly focused on letter answers. That's a very not ultimately productive way to think. Okay, let's try another problem. Let me get one here. There. Here we go. Boom. Please answer with the answer buttons. They should be on the left. Some of you have arrived since the last problem, so I'll write them on the board. Please answer with the A, B, C, D, E buttons on the left. Here's a timer. Have fun. Okay, a lot of you are still without answers here, so let me give you 15 more seconds or so to answer the problem. Remember that if you are at the point where you are just staring at a couple of answers, then you might as well just make a guess. Because making a guess after staring for like 30 seconds is not any better than just making a guess right here and now. So if you haven't picked something, then please pick something. Give you 10 more seconds to do that. Looks like people have, and there's still a couple people not answering. If you are one of the people not answering, then you're not really preparing yourself for the GMAT. Just think on that. So, okay, here's the class statistics. Class statistics are here. So people are all over the place. Let's discuss. Okay. What's the comparison? I mean, it's written in a few different ways. But someone in the text box, please tell me, like, what are we actually comparing in the first place? So the action of stars and the sun, that's pretty concise. Let's see if anybody else has anything to add. Yeah, the comparison, depending on how it's written, it's either like the sun versus any other star, or like action of the sun versus action of any other star. So, okay, the thing you guys have got to realize here is that if it says the sun's core, that's not the sun. So, let me just illustrate this. Like, when you put apostrophe S on something, it becomes an adjective. It's not a noun anymore. So if you say something like, something just made a sound. Sorry. If you say the sun, at least it acts, I don't know if grammar purists would say that it's an adjective or not, but it acts as an adjective. So if you say the sun, that's a noun. So, but on the other hand, if you say the sun apostrophe S core, then the only noun here is core. Like, this is acting as an adjective, and this is acting as a noun. This is like red core, blue core, big core, small core, sun's core. That's a core. It's not a sun. So the ones that say the sun's core are problematic because that's not the sun. So here you have like a star, but then it says the sun's core. That's not okay. Any star, but this is not a star. And this is a star, and that's not a star. So it's tricky, but not tricky. Because it's tricky in the sense that in spoken language, people don't have to be this nitpicky. Because people are basically not dumb. Like if someone said this kind of thing out loud, it would still be manifestly clear that the comparison was between the sun and other stars. Like I don't have to be this exact with everything I say. But written language has higher standards. But it's also not tricky in the sense that it is very black and white. Like if you have the sun apostrophe S core, then that's not the sun, period, end of story. So like once you figure that thing out, it's actually, light on, light off, 0 or 1. It's very black and white. So, because there's a lot of comparisons that are like that. In fact, it's the same thing as this one that we wrote over here. This is not Chopin. This is concertos. It's the same sort of deal. This is an adjective, and that's the noun. And that's the other noun. So the nouns here are concertos and Mozart. The nouns are not Chopin and Mozart. This is light on, light off. There's no subtlety to that. Like this is an incorrect comparison. Same thing, these things are not talking about the sun. They're talking about the sun's core. So once you know that that's how it works, it's actually sort of straightforward. It's weird at first, but once you get it, you get it. So these are problematic, among other things, for that reason. Now, let's talk about A. How does like work? There's actually 2 problems with A. We'll come back to it in a second. But let's talk about sentences like this. What kind of stuff has to go in those blanks? Like, let's color these blanks so that you have a better idea. Let's make one of these blanks garnet colored, which is like burgundy. And then let's make the other blank blue. Okay, yeah, the burgundy blank has to be a noun. It might have modifiers on it. But the point is that it should not be anything. It should not be a clause. It should not contain an action. So this should be, I'll fix that typo in a second. This should be a noun. Like perhaps with modifiers, but not a clause. Like in other words, it should not be subject plus verb. So what should be here? Text box. It should start with the comparable noun, and then it should be a sentence. So this should be, if you want to call it, and I think it's called independent clause, but the point is this should be a sentence, and it should start with the noun that's comparable. This should be a whole sentence, which I believe they call independent clause, if you like those kinds of words. And it should start with the comparable noun. So that's how a sentence is starting with like work. So for example, if you say something like, like my brother, I have difficulty waking up early in the morning. So this is a correct sentence. This is a noun. I mean, it could be pronouns as well. But whenever we say nouns, that implies that it could also be pronouns. This is so let me just change that. This should be more a pronoun. anything where you could put a noun, you theoretically can put a pronoun too, if it makes sense. That's why they're called pronouns, because they stand in for nouns. So, like my brother, just a noun. This is the comparable thing. Blah, blah, blah. This is a sentence. I have difficulty waking up early. So this is correct. On the other hand, if you say, like I told you yesterday, I'm not coming to the party. This is incorrect because you cannot follow like with a whole sentence or a clause. Like this is incorrect because that's a clause. Has subject and verb. So this is incorrect. Smiley face if this makes sense. Remind me what a gerund is again, I'm sorry. Is that that's one of the ing. I'm not very good with grammatical terms. I apologize for that. Yeah, if it functions as a noun, then theoretically it should be able to be there, like anything that acts as a noun. So yeah, like swimming, comma, running burns a lot of calories, then that should be fine. So yeah, that would be okay. So if that's what, pardon me for not knowing the terms. Like swimming, running burns many calories. So yeah, this is totally fine. This is a noun of whatever type. And that's another noun that's comparable to it, and the blue part's a sentence. So this is also correct. The other kind of incorrect like sentence would be, oh yeah, if there's modifiers in there, then that's a different story. So we'll get there. If you say like my brother, getting up in the morning has always been hard for me. That's also incorrect because this is the wrong comparison. It's not my brother versus getting up. That's incorrect. My I would have to be at the start of that blue part. So incorrect. Smiley face if you guys understand the examples that are on this page. Okay. Yeah, Jay, the names of things like gerunds are totally unimportant. They do not matter at all. Like, for example, let's say that you're driving a car, and you come up to a red light, and so do I. And let's say that you call that red light a red light, and I call it Joe. Then it doesn't matter at all as long as we both stop at it. And in fact, naming too many things will just get in your way. Like imagine how much harder it would be to drive if you had to name everything along the highway. It would be almost impossible. So yeah, if you guys are naming too many things, that's really going to work against you. You should not be doing that. Like if you understand how something works, you should never give it a name because all that will do is just burden you. It's important not to do that. Names are for things that you have to ask questions about. So then you name them so that you can ask a question. Like if you don't know how these gerunds work, then you're like, okay, how does a gerund work? You only need the name for the purpose of asking a question. Once you understand it, you can totally forget what the name is. So that's the problem here. A has two issues. So using the color code that we had over there, number one, that's a clause. So that's already an error. Like clause is bad. After like. And then also, this is not the other part of the comparison either. Like once is not beside. So this is double wrong. It's just two different colors of wrong. This. That leaves us with E. This comparison is written a little bit more like fluffily, but it's the only answer here that's actually right. Notice you do have a star and a sun, and this is not like, so you don't have this kind of restriction like you do on the other page. Like as actually should be followed by a clause in this kind of situation. Questions about this problem, please ask. I see a couple people typing stuff. Pablo says, some teacher told me that like was used for similar things and as was used for exactly the same thing. That seems wrong to me. And when I say seems wrong, I mean it's wrong. I mean, they're both comparisons. Like if you, let's see. Here's the question that I'm answering right now. Pablo's question is that. This is not true. I mean, exactly the same thing would be sort of pointless, because what would be the point of making a comparison? I mean, this doesn't really make sense. And let me tell you why it doesn't make sense. Because, I mean, just think about the nature of comparisons. I mean, any comparison has things that are the same. I mean, hence the comparison in the first place. And you also have to have things that are different. So, hence the need for a comparison in the first place. So, I mean, let me just give you a couple of really stupidly simple examples, and we'll go from there. Like if I say something like my brother, I have a nerdy sense of humor. There are elements that are the same, like the sense of humor is the same. This is the basis of the comparison. But the people are different. So, one is my brother. The other is me. So, as is not different. Like if you say, just as you must learn scales before you can learn advanced pieces of music, you must learn to sew basic stitches before you can create well-fitted clothing. So, I mean, there's things that are the same here, and there's things that are different. Like the overall nature of the act is the same. In other words, in both cases, there's some basic thing that you need to know before you can move on to more advanced things. But the specific acts are not the same. One is about sewing and the other one's about music. So So that's any comparison is going to do that. If it's a comparison, by definition, something will be the same, but something will be different, and that's what a comparison is. These two different things are actually the same in this way. That's what any comparison is. So if everything were the same, it would be nonsense. You know, I have difficulty getting up early, and also I have difficulty getting up early. That would be sort of weird. And of course, if everything were different, you would have no comparison in the first place. So this is, Satish is talking about, this is a different kind of situation. This actually is not a comparison at all. This is not comparing. This means you're taking on the role of a monkey, which is not a comparison thing. So this kind of as is not a comparison at all. It means that, so none of these things apply to it. I mean, it means that you actually took on the role of a monkey. Well, whatever that means. I mean, that doesn't really make sense. So let me replace that with something that actually makes sense. My friend acted like a CEO versus my friend acted as a CEO. That will be more sensible. So that means that's a CEO now. I mean, the first sentence is a comparison. This means that, like, CEOs act in certain ways and talk in certain ways and dress in certain ways, and my friend did those things. This is not a comparison. Like, this means that, like, the real CEO died or got sick or something, so my friend had to step up and be the CEO. It's not a comparison. It means my friend actually did that. So maybe that's what Pablo's teacher meant, but at the same time, I felt like with most of these things, more explanation is needed. Because if you just say that as means the same thing, then you will wind up with people thinking that stuff like this is wrong, because you're like, oh, those are not exactly the same. So you gotta explain. No, this is a comparison with as. This is a legitimate comparison with as. They don't work grammatically the same way. Like is followed by nouns, my brother. As is followed by clauses in a comparison. But you can make comparisons with as, like this one. Other questions? Okay, so I think we can move on to the next one. Sarah, the one you asked about, you're not gonna see that for reasons that are well beyond what's tested on this exam. So the super quick answer to your question is you wouldn't put that kind of thing at the beginning of the sentence, but you could see it at the end. So that's what you'll see. Okay, let's move on to another problem. Sarah says, is it important to parallel you? Ideally, yes. I mean, you wouldn't want to switch from you to, like, one. Or from you to, you would want to write them it's parallels. I mean, you want to write it the same way. Like, you could put a musician here and then a tailor here instead of you. And then you'd still be fine. But if this says you, then this should also say you. It's just a parallelism thing. Okay. Next one is this. I'll give you less time because this is really short. How about 1 minute? Everybody please pick something here. There are a lot of people without answers, so please pick something. Remember, this is the GMAT, and you do have to pick something, otherwise you'll be stuck staring at the problem. Okay. So let's take a look. Some of you still don't have answers. If you don't have an answer, remember that you're not really preparing for this test, because you got to answer the questions. There you go. Kurt, I'll have to go back and check that out at the end. Okay, so let's look. We do have a consensus of sorts. It's still a weak consensus. It's only about 1/3 of people, but it's still some sort of consensus. So let's talk about the comparison here. The comparison is, it should be pretty clear what is compared. So what's compared is traditional pharmacies versus online drugstores. So that is enough to get rid of E, because this is traditional pharmacies. That means that you would need to have online drugstores right there, and you don't, so E is wrong. Any questions about that? Okay, now that's the only one with like. This is a couple of other miscellaneous things going on here. If you have as in a comparison, let's review what we said about that. This is a clause, meaning it's something with a subject and verb of its own. It's like a sentence. In comparisons, as should be followed by a clause with subject and verb. So basically a sentence. So as this is a sentence by itself, you must learn scales before you could learn to play advanced pieces. That's a sentence all by itself. That's how comparisons with as work. Notice that's not a comparison, so that's exempt from this kind of requirement. But when you have as in a comparison, you got to have a clause after it. So this is not okay for that reason. That is, the as in a comparison needs a whole clause, not just a noun. So that is bad. Or it needs, or it can have a prep phrase. Let me illustrate that also. Farah, I don't know chapter numbers, but if you found a chapter on comparisons, then that's where this stuff would be. With as in comparisons, should be followed by odds and evens. Odds and evens. That doesn't. Wait a minute. That sounds like math. Just look for comparisons, and you should find it. As in comparison should be followed by a clause or by a prepositional phrase. And again, to respond to JC from earlier, the only reason I know these names at all is because I have to explain them to classes. As long as you know what these things are, you don't have to know what they're called. So, as an example of being followed by a clause, if I say something like, let's see, Joe gave 10% of his salary to charity this year as he did last year. He did last year is a clause. Has a subject and a verb, so that's fine. Or you can have a prepositional phrase. So if you say the weather is hot and dry in Nevada as it is in Arizona. That's a clause, or you can say as in Arizona the weather is hot and dry in Nevada. So as it is in Arizona is still a clause. It's a prepositional phrase, as in the case of whatever. So this is a clause in choice C. Is the case. It's a weirdly written clause, but it's still a clause. Like that's like saying the case is. So that's fine. And so is that. This is a prepositional phrase. So that's grammatically also okay. Now the problems with A and B are, there's a few things wrong with these. The most glaring issue with A is the it. That's a pronoun and it doesn't stand for anything at all. Like remember the word it here would have to have a noun to stand for. It doesn't have one. So the pronoun it in choice A doesn't stand for anything. If you don't understand that, you can ask a question in the text box. Otherwise, you're good. The problem with B is that it's not really true. Like with the case here is incorrect because it's not sensible. Like if you look at this sentence here, this is actually in Arizona. Like we're talking about like this literally refers to something that is in Arizona. That's why this is right. The sentence refers to something that is literally in Arizona. So and this is literally in Nevada. Like those are literally correct prepositional phrases. The problem with here is that it doesn't make sense. Like nothing is with the case of traditional pharmacies. Like what this is spoken English sneaking into the guise of written English, because people talk like that all the time. Like as with this. But with doesn't make sense here. You're not talking about anything that is with this case. So with in choice B doesn't make literal sense. So that's not okay either. That leaves us with C. In the text box, someone says, as in the case of, that should be fine. As in the case of, because it's literally in that case. So yes, that would be fine. That leaves us with C. As is the case with traditional pharmacies clause, prescriptions are the cornerstone of a successful online drugstore. So there you go. The Deadly Five thing is something in the strategy guide referring to the 5 most commonly tested pronouns. As long as you know to look at pronouns when you see them, that's the point. So the Deadly Five thing is meant to remind people that when they see an it or a they or something like that, I forget what all 5 of them were, but any pronouns, if you see a pronoun, you better go look for something that it stands for. It is raining, you're not going to see in a formally written sentence, because that if you're extremely formal in your writing, then it is raining actually has issues. But they won't put that on the test. So, Satish, you don't have to worry about it. Okay, any other questions about this problem? If not, we can try to sneak in one more. Okay. Let's see. How about let's do this one. Right here. And then this is the last one. Yeah, this is a class on comparisons. I'm assuming you just showed up. Yeah, this is a class about comparisons. Take a minute and a half or so. Enjoy. Please answer with the answer buttons. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's getting to be that time. So make sure that you indicate an answer pretty soon. Okay, there's still a number of you without an answer. That means you gotta get on that. There's Naresh, there's PC, there's Sudhir. Remember, you do not have the option of not answering these things, so please pick the A, B, C, D, or E. Okay. All right, the 3 individuals I just addressed are still not answering the problem, so if you are actually here, just make sure you know that that's not. Okay, 1 person got an answer now. But if you're one of those other 2 who's not answering the question, make sure you know that that's not okay on the GMAT. You have to answer everything in order that you get it. So here are your results. Strong consensus this time. Still, some people are picking C and D, so let's talk about it. Unlike emergency calls that do this, so unlike emergency calls, remember that when you have this kind of structure with like, you can have modifiers after that. So in some cases, lots and lots and lots of modifiers. So like blah 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 blah, as long as it's a noun with a bunch of modifiers. So if you look at this, you have this is a modifier, and this is another modifier. So it's really unlike emergency calls, and then the second part is cellular calls. Here, this is all the end of the first modifier. The end of the first modifier, end of the first modifier, end of the first modifier. That's an and, so that doesn't end until here. And then you have additional modifiers in this problem, and also in this one, and also in this one. So you basically have, unlike emergency calls, A says cellular calls, B says cellular calls, C says the location of the caller, D says emergency operators, and E says emergency operators. Well, the comparison has to be between emergency calls and cellular calls. So the intended comparison is cellular calls are not like emergency calls. You can tell that this sentence is old because cell phones are not actually like this anymore, but it's beside the point. So it's definitely not a comparison between emergency calls and people. And it's also definitely not a comparison between emergency calls and a physical location. So those would not make sense. Those are kind of like this table is not like communism. So these don't make sense. These are nonsense. The grammar is fine, but that's not the main point. Remember that bad comparisons are almost always not grammar issues. They're usually things like this. They are things that are nonsense. So AB. Nobody picked A, so there should be some explanations forthcoming here. Why did you guys eliminate A? What's wrong with it? Yeah, where is a problem? Because this is not, it's actually kind of funny if you think about it. Choice A is actually saying that they tell the operator these things inside the phone lines. So they actually deliver this message to the operator inside the phone lines. That would be an awfully small operator. So that's not how this works. So where is incorrect? Again, it's not grammatically wrong. There's nothing grammatically wrong there at all. It's nonsense. Modifier errors also tend to be nonsense and not grammatical problems. So A is just ridiculous, so A is wrong. B is not ridiculous, so that's the point. Unlike emergency calls that do this and thus do that, cellular calls do this instead. So B is correct. Again, the goal of today is to get you to a place where you can eliminate C, D, and E really quickly. Because as soon as you see unlike emergency calls, you should be like, what is unlike emergency calls? And boom, okay, it's cellular calls. Questions? If you have any questions, fire away. No, I know Kurt has a question. I'll take that one in a sec. Some other people are typing things. Then we're getting ready to close here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, wait and see what you guys are typing. What is next week's topic? I don't know yet. In general, I don't pick topics until the day of or the night before the study hall, because the topics are based on submissions. So the submissions for the next study hall have not happened yet. Let's see. Is this a random class on, Naresh, I don't really understand what you're asking me. If you're asking me, do I know the topic ahead of time, the answer is no. For the reasons that I just explained. It's based on what people submit. So if people have not submitted things yet, then, so no, it's a last minute decision. Satish, no. I mean, there's no such thing as a cellular line in the first place. That's actually the whole point of cellular phones, is that they don't have telephone lines. So that would not be a sensible comparison, because cell phones don't have lines. So the comparison is emergency calls and cellular emergency calls. I mean, if you want, it's emergency calls through telephone lines versus emergency calls on cellular phones. I mean, you could do that. But as long as the comparison is calls versus calls, then it's a legitimate comparison. So, yeah. There's no question as to which of these comparisons is the best. Like, remember that you don't have to create the sentence from scratch. What you have to do is decide which of the existing options is best, which is a much easier task than trying to write a perfect sentence. So I hope that helps. So yeah, you're not entirely off with that thought, but it's not something you have to do. It's not weekly, it's every other week. It's every other Thursday. So the information is on if you Google Thursdays with Ron, you will find the information. Kurt, you asked a question a while ago about store. I wouldn't say that's totally wrong. In general, they don't really have word choice issues like that. Because that would be something that non-native speakers would just get killed by. So, I mean, you can have a store of energy. I mean, it doesn't mean you have a retail store. But in general, those kinds of diction issues are not going to be tested, so you can rest easy there. It's not every Thursday. If you go back and look at the list go look at the archive of sessions, and you will notice that there are 40+ sessions that are all spaced every other Thursday. So it's every other Thursday. Ollie, if a correct verbal question takes 3 or more minutes, that probably means that you are not good enough at reading English yet. That's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but if you are taking that long on average, then it probably means you're not ready to take this test yet. It means that you should walk away from it for a while and get better and faster at reading professionally written English. That's unfortunately what that would mean. Because 3 minutes per question is a lot of time. That's almost twice as much time as you have. So if it's taking you that long, then it means you don't process the English fast enough yet, unfortunately. We got to close here, guys, in a second. So if you have any other business-related questions or something, you can throw those at me now. Otherwise, let's kill it. I'm going to turn off the recording at this point. So have a great 2 weeks. Good night. Good luck. Pablo, the days before the test, you should do almost nothing. The day before the test, you should do absolutely nothing at all. You should kind of chill out, go see a movie, hang out, eat, sleep. Don't do the GMAT. You need to start stepping down the amount of work that you do as you approach the test. And the day before the test, you should be doing nothing. It's a lot like an athletic competition. If you have a big running race or a big game tomorrow, you don't train hard today. In fact, you don't train at all today. You just chill. Very much the same thing. Okay, I'm going to kill the recording. Good night. Good luck.